My name is AJ Riedel, and you're listening to the Thriving Through podcast, the podcast where each week I have real conversations with self-employed consultants about what it really takes to build a sustainable, profitable, and fulfilling consulting practice. You know that voice in your head that whispers, "What if you fail?" when you think about going independent? Today's guest had that same voice. But instead of letting it stop her, she had a conversation with it. And that conversation changed everything. Justine Lemanowicz spent 10 years planning her exit from corporate life. But it was fear that kept her in her daytime job. Fear of failure, fear of inconsistent revenue, fear of the unknown. Sound familiar? But here's what Justine discovered when she finally asked herself, what's the worst thing that could happen? The answer wasn't nearly as scary as the fear itself. In fact, it became the key to unlocking a thriving fractional chief financial officer practice built entirely on referrals. In our conversation today, Justine shares the exact process she used to overcome her fears, why she talked to 25 people before making the leap into independent consulting, and how she built a consulting practice that generates consistent income without traditional marketing. She'll also review her biggest surprise about running her own practice. Spoiler alert, you won't escape office politics just because you're independent. If you've been sitting on the fence about starting your own consulting practice, or if you're struggling with feast or famine cycles in your current business, this conversation is going to give you both the practical strategies and the mindset shifts you need to move forward with confidence. Let's dive in. My guest on today's episode of the Thriving Through podcast is Justine Lemanowicz. Justine, welcome.
Oh, thank you for having me on your podcast, AJ.
Well, I'm excited to jump in and talk to you. So I have a question I ask all of my podcast guests. It's the first question.
Okay.
What was your path to self-employment?
Ooh, it was a long path. I'm the type of person, I have goals, I plan, I overanalyze, which serves me well in my profession, not in my personal life sometimes. But I I actually 10 years ago I bought a domain fractional-accountant.net, and I knew at some point I was going to go off on my own. Um, And I've been in business 2 years this month now, so big win for me.
Yes,
But
congratulations.
thank you. So I guess, when I started seriously considering that, let's call it 3 years ago, going off on my own, um, I started thinking about, retirement at some point. And that's typically when a CFO transitions to a fractional CFO because they want to keep their skin in the game. They enjoy what they're doing. And, it gives them something else, to do in retirement that they find interesting. I I decided I want to start pursuing this path now and see what I can build, like how big I can build this, what it'll morph into. And the only thing that has held me back um, was fear. And so I started really questioning myself. And that question was, what's the worst thing that could happen? What's the worst thing that could happen? I can fail. Failure's not an option for me. But if I did fail, let's just say that happened, I have to go get a job with somebody else. So because I enjoy what I do so much, um, and working with multiple clients, I'm going to make it work. That's what I've decided. And so far it's worked out really well.
What I like is how you had a conversation with that voice in your head that was saying, you might fail, and that's bad. And you had a wonderful kind of conversation saying, what's the worst thing that could happen? Worst case, I go back and get a job. Okay. And you kind of talked yourself off that fear ledge by projecting out and recognizing that what that fear voice was telling you wasn't all that scary.
It wasn't, and let me add to that. So prior to making the decision, I probably met with 25 people. Some of them were mentors, some of them were, former owners of some of the companies that I've worked for. Some of them were solopreneurs, some of them started their own business. I've met with other fractional CFOs. So I really vetted out the fact that there is a need for more fractionals in the marketplace, and I can do this, and why not do this? So I
So
did my
you
research.
you did your research to calm the fear part of you down. You knew what you were doing. It wasn't impetuous, just one day I'm going to start to do this.
Correct.
And I want to talk a little bit more about those conversations. What kinds of questions did you ask? And what convinced you that there was a market need?
So the type, I guess it depends on the person. So for someone who started out as a solopreneur and grew their business, what did you experience when you were starting out? And one of the pieces of advice that I received was make sure you have about 6 months of expenses, six months of funds to cover your expenses in your bank account, just in case you experience a lull or you don't have as many clients lined up on day one as you would like. Um, Other, fractional CFOs that I know in my network, I'm like, is there a demand? And there definitely was. We actually all play nice in the same space together, just because and I might be making an assumption, but most of us fractional CFOs who are on our own and not with a firm, all of our business is referrals. And when you receive a referral from a trusted source, there's no or little competition. Like they're just going to go with you or they're not.
Mhm.
So, um, and I think, you know, just knowing, like having the encouragement, like people who know me and they're like, you can do this. Like there's no reason not to go forward. Like we'll support you, we'll help you. And I did have that support as soon as, call it being lucky, being blessed, right out of the gate. I had my first engagement before I even transitioned off my own W-2 job. And then my second engagement, like day one when I launched. So, like I said, I'm going to call it blessed that it's worked out so well so far.
Absolutely. So you said that it's all referral, and I can understand why, because companies need to trust you in order to let you come in, and like that's a really vulnerable world to let them give give you entree to their financials and their books, and you have to have that. What happens if the referral network starts to dry up?
So I do a lot of networking. I do a lot of networking, and it takes a while to build those relationships. And because if you really think about it, if you go to an event, you're talking surface level conversations first of all, and then maybe as you meet for coffee or and you start meeting for lunch more often, then you start really getting to know the person and digging deeper in what they do, in their business for their clients and their personal lives too. So that kind of matters. They see, you're that you're a person of integrity, how you approach your clients, that you're trustful, and that they feel comfortable referring you. One, I think one of the most important things as a fractional CFO to do is when you're working with a prospect or a client, make sure you just like almost gloss over the fact, because when they need my services, they almost feel embarrassed, that their books got to this point. And so I always start off those conversations. Hey, you didn't go into business to run finance or accounting. And that's where most of the issues sometimes start, is they don't have somebody who knows, exactly what's going on. And so I make them feel comfortable. You know, they started their core business is what they're great at. It's understanding the financials and being able to build a strategy around the KPIs that you may or may not even be able to identify in their current state of financial statements.
So do you typically work with like smaller companies that are moving from entrepreneur into more professional management, or when does a company need a fractional CFO? And is it sort of an interim to hiring a full-time CFO?
So, in my experience, companies need a fractional CFO a lot sooner than they think they need a fractional CFO. And I only say that because, if like I'm talking with one prospect right now and they are in a ton of debt, and at some point they stopped being able to cover their operating expenses and just kept going deeper and deeper into debt. Their financials aren't structured in a way that they can report on gross profit. So that's like they're not recognizing revenue correctly. So you don't even have that one-to-one match. So if you're an owner running your business, or you've got a bookkeeper, you may not even be familiar with that concept. I think so. Back to your question, I work with small to mid-market companies. So I'll help startups, but they typically, don't need, they might need somebody plugged in 8 hours a month, which was what I was working with one client previously. But I think, small mid-market, I find myself working in the professional services space a lot. I have a background in IT, not as a technician, but on the finance and accounting side. So I seem to get a lot of referrals from my network, there. And, it could be any revenue and 2 million to, I don't know, 150 million. It depends, on the industry.
Okay. When we talked earlier, you told a story about your first fixed price project that went sideways. Tell us about what happened and how much did you underestimate, and what did you learn from that experience?
So I did learn a lot, and it's funny. I actually spoke with a couple other fractionals in my network about that same conversation. So this was my first engagement. It was fixed price. I'm not against that because it does help companies budget. But so when I put together, there was like 3 separate work streams. I was tasked to work on with another colleague, and I put together what I thought was good estimates, padded it slightly just because there's going to be those unexpected topics, issues that arise that you weren't expecting, and it happens in almost every engagement. But I found myself spending a lot of time on the phone, having one-on-one conversations that weren't even related to the project. And a lot of time, like, for example, hey, our health insurance renewal's coming up. Can you help us with our plan design and look at our costs and see if they're reasonable? And, look how we're splitting the cost between the employee and employer. Sure, I love having those conversations, but I didn't plan on having those conversations. However, what I learned after that is just do the right thing, which is kind of what I always try to do or what I always do. You have to, that there's a value add there, right? So you don't want to play psychologist, sometimes, but I think there's value in just taking the call, maybe cutting it short, giving them some resources to refer to. But yeah, and it wasn't a big lesson, so maybe I'm kind of blessed in that. I've heard some other solopreneurs have a lot worse experiences. So
So how do you, so it's sort of like you have potential for scope creep.
mhm.
In the future, if you had another client like that who was asking you for things that were outside the scope, would you tell them that you could help them, but you would have to charge more? Or how would you handle that if you had that again?
I think, well, in this actually wasn't our statement of work, is you add a clause, anything outside scope will be charged at X amount per hour. Now, do you hold the client accountable for that? I guess it says it depends, phone call here or
Mhm.
there, your opinion on A, B, C, or D, sure. But it's just, when you, let's say, for example, I go into an engagement and I have to take their financials from cash to accrual or something like that, and discover that, oh, hey, there's 3 years of receivables that are open because you've been booking your deposits to income instead of applying against the invoices. Well, that's an unknown, and yes, I'm going to charge for that because you had no knowledge of that. But like I said, these conversations, I think there are valuable, not only to the client, and it also, besides accomplishing the work you set out to do, it gives them a sense that, you really do care. And I definitely want to leave my clients with that thought, once I transition off, if it's a project, that engagement. And, maybe I'll get another referral from them if they, invest in another business or have a colleague that needs my services. And that's just kind of how you look at it. It's a give and take.
Okay. So it kind of depends,
It
but
does.
if you're going to err on the side of anything, it's building the relationship.
Yes.
Okay. On a separate topic, you're going through a branding right now, rebranding.
Hmm.
What made you realize your current branding wasn't working, or why did you decide to rebrand?
I feel like I'll be transparent. I don't love the name of my company, and I'll probably keep it. But I feel like I'm going down a path that's also technical. I think I mentioned, I had to, before we had our call, we were talking about LinkedIn, and I said, oh, yes, I do need to update my profile because I just added a new line of business. So I'm consulting for clients, small to mid market, to look at their current processes and evaluate where their biggest challenges are, and then determine 2 to 3 AI automation tools that'll solve for that problem. And that usually creates some cost savings there as well. But so that's a little bit more technical. And then I'm in infancy stages of working somebody with a developer to write a web application. So I was like, it's finance and it's tech, so fintech, but I feel like my website's it doesn't really represent what I'm currently doing now. The look and the feel of it. And I am not a branding expert. So yes, I am working with somebody.
Okay. Tell me more about this new service, these sort of AI assessments, or what do you call it, your new service?
So I call them like finance tech advisory services. There's a lot of talk about AI out there right now, a lot of chatter. And there are some larger companies offering AI and automation tools right now for finance and accounting that solve some specific needs. I feel like there's a gap in the market to actually figure out where do you start? I've talked to a lot of business owners and, made an assumption that even the large corporations have a roadmap. Most of them don't. So I saw a gap, and I've always been really interested in technology. Um, so I thought, why not learn about all the tools that are out there? And there's a lot of tools currently being developed and very quickly. So I feel like there's going to be a little bit of a flooding of the market. And since I started my career working in accounts receivable, working in accounts payable, managing, overseeing inventory and warehousing. So I've had hands-on experience in everything. So I understand the processes and the challenges. And then as a fractional, you start digging under the hood, and then you identify the bottlenecks, like where's improvement needed. So there are automation tools out there already, but having AI sit on top of those tools, it's going to be fascinating once companies start deploying these tools. I'll give you a specific example of one of the tools that I demoed recently. So most CFOs, controllers, vice president of finance, who's ever going to be presenting the financials to the shareholders, they will, put together and like answer the questions before they're asked. They're going to put together notes. Okay, here's where we are year over year, quarter over quarter. Here's net income. And then we'll do a variance analysis because we understand what questions they're going to ask. Well, this tool will actually drill down into the general ledger and grab the transaction that caused the variance over whatever threshold you set. So it could be like $1 or a percentage. They'll find the transaction, and they'll already create those notes based on your prompt. It's crazy. So that'll save, especially larger the corporations. This will save a lot of time just having that summary. There's tools out there for like collections and managing collections, all the way down to, okay, I've already sent you 2 emails, one, the original invoice, 2 reminders, and now I'm going to have my robot call you. Now they haven't perfected that yet, because I could tell you personally, I don't want to talk to a robot. If it doesn't sound like a robot, I don't mind talking to one, but it's really interesting. I mean, it's fascinating what's going on. So you're either going to embrace it or you're going to get left behind.
Right. But it's overwhelming. So you're taking on the task of demoing all of this stuff and figuring out what is really right, and then offering that as a service to your clients.
Yes. And I think too, I mean, psychologically, there is some fear when you start talking about AI. Just it does need oversight. It's just like a person. You can't trust 100%. You have to verify. But there is a lot of people who are worried and anxious about losing their positions, and to me, that's valid. So I think I'm helping the client, the shareholders, the owners, do what's right for their business. I'm not for eliminating people, but when I hear these experts say it's not going to eliminate any jobs, it already has started eliminating jobs. So that's what's happening. It's going to,
Right.
unfortunately.
Right. But in a lot of cases, it does a better job. I mean, with the example you gave of drilling down on the variances, it's probably more accurate in finding the variances than a human.
It probably, yes, you are right. You are right. Because I mean, if you you could have to look through several months and then pull all the transactions and then, create a pivot table and compare them and figure it out. So being able to just tell that story, that's going to save a lot of time as well.
Right. Right. And provide better value to the shareholders.
Correct.
Yeah. This is your 2-year month.
Yes.
Looking back at 2 years in business, what would you do differently if you started over today?
Oh, um, I've never thought about that. Trying to think like what mistakes have I made? Well, I'm perfect. No, that's
I
I
love it.
I'm kidding. I'm absolutely kidding. I I feel like, and I already knew this, I'm working with clients who are in trouble, right? For the most part. So sometimes it's a matter of, I need to get paid to make sure I can help you. And maybe being a little bit generous with payment terms. But again, I want to help my client. And yes, that's a risk I'm taking. And as long as you're aware of that risk, that there's a chance you might not get paid on time or paid at all in some cases. It's a risk you can take. The other thing you can do, and this is just not my approach. I was told, how to be a fractional CFO 101 on one of my networking groups. Always bill ahead. And if the client doesn't pay you, stop working. That's just not who I am. That's not my approach.
Okay. Yeah. So you made it authentic to you, and you didn't
Mhm.
take the advice just because others told you to.
Correct. And I think that brought a lot of goodwill too, with
Uh-huh.
the clients and other referrals, futuristically.
What is the biggest surprise about running your own consulting practice? Something that you never expected when you were an employee?
So I think one of the things I was very naive about, and I find this funny now to even speak it out loud, is that I wouldn't have to deal with any like office politics. I absolutely will, 100% on every single engagement because we're dealing with people. But I thought as an outsider, you know, I'm going to be, immune to that, and you won't because you become part of their team in essence,
Right.
in a lot of
Right.
cases.
Yeah. So if you wanted to do this to get out of politics, too bad.
That's correct.
Where do you see your practice in 2 to 3 years?
Whew. I would like to still continue to serve clients who are distressed and help them turn their businesses around. Um, I am making somewhat of a pivot to be a little bit more technical. And I can tell you, I don't know, and here's why. I think things are rapidly changing. And so people who adapt and can change and see where the need is in the market are going to survive and thrive. I 2 years ago, I wouldn't imagine that I was going to, go down a path of advising firms on AI and automation tools, but there's a need out there.
Mhm.
So I don't know, but it's going to be somewhere fun.
Okay. The do you do you think that the AI services, the AI advisory services, are they going to require, is that service going to require a different approach to marketing and sales than your
Absolutely.
fractional CFO? And how is that going to be different?
I I I'm not doing any marketing right now, like at all. Besides again building relationships. So that business is like not reaching, it wouldn't be reaching the same audience. It's going to be a completely different audience. So I will, I have already kind of thought this through, like um, I might need, somebody to help with lead gen. I may need somebody to lead the marketing efforts. That is not my area of expertise. I don't enjoy it. It's who, not how. So I am going to have to approach that in a completely different fashion. Now, I do feel that clients I have worked with in the past, clients I will be working with, clients I'm working with now, you know, that will lead to an AI automation conversation and then vice versa. So when I'm working with a client and I'm consulting on what kind of tools I would recommend them deploying, That might lead to some fractional CFO services, engagement.
Okay, so they're synergistic, but the marketing, you recognize the marketing approach is going to have to be different.
Definitely.
If someone in accounting, finance accounting is thinking about going independent as a fractional CFO, what's the one thing they should do before they make that leap?
I think the advice that I received from a good friend was make sure you have funds set aside to cover your expenses. Um, and another one of my friend actually said, make sure you have your first gig before you put in your notice. That's not always possible. Like I said, I'm lucky and blessed, and that did happen. But I would say that, you can either approach it two ways: jump off a cliff, and it's fight or flight at that point, or start it as a side hustle potentially. Um, Personally, I couldn't go the side hustle route, only because I'm either all in or I'm out. Like,
Mm.
I can't just be, you know, like this is a thing that I'm doing on the side, because my head is just, when I'm working for a company, my head's still there when I'm not even online. I'm still thinking of, how can I approach this problem? What else do I need to do? Have I thought of designing this model that'll kind of help them grow and run their business this particular way? So, yeah, I would just say, do your research, talk to as many people as you can, make sure there's a need in the market, which you can discover by doing market research or networking, talking to other people, hearing their experiences. But just do your research and make sure that it's a right fit for you. If you don't like networking, this probably won't work out for you. And I wouldn't say, people don't like to sell. I don't like to sell either. I don't sell. I consult. It's, if you want to work with me or you think there's a benefit to it, that's great. I understand you need to do what's right for your business, and that's kind of how I approach it. So just do your homework, do your due diligence, like you would on any big decision.
Okay. Now I have a couple rapid fire as we wrap up, a couple rapid fire questions.
All right.
What's the best advice you received about consulting that you initially ignored?
Who? Um, I really don't think I ignored anybody's advice. I think and I was like a sponge when I had these conversations. Like, I'm not going to, just dismiss anything that anybody's telling me because they've already lived it. So I don't think I really dismissed any
Okay.
of the advice I was given.
Okay. You came in as a sponge. That's good. Last question. What do you wish clients understood about working with a fractional CFO?
Hmm. I think the term fractional CFO is kind of confusing to people, so I'm wishing we could rebrand it into something a little bit easier to understand. Like, I can help you save your business. Um, uh, they may not understand what we do, and I guess, listening to podcasts and doing some reading, like, that's the first thing you want to do, is grab your attention in a very short amount of time, shorter than your elevator speech. I will help you turn your business into a cash flow positive business.
Mm,
Like,
that's
that makes more service than, hey, I work with multiple clients, you know, uh, looking at profitability and building KPIs so that they can run like all of this other stuff. Like, that's really the meat of what I do, is I help businesses thrive and survive.
like it. Yep. It comes down to messaging
Mhm.
and how you say it. Well, that's a wrap on today's episode of the Thriving Through podcast. Justine, thank you so much for being my guest today.
AJ, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate your time.
What struck me most about my conversation with Justine is how she turned her biggest weakness, that analytic, overthinking nature, into her greatest strength. Instead of letting fear paralyze her, she channeled that same analytic energy into research, preparation, and building relationships. Her approach reminds us that there is no single right way to build a consulting practice. While some people might tell you to bill ahead and cut off non-paying clients immediately, Justine chose authenticity over conventional wisdom. She chose relationships over transactions. And the result? A thriving practice built entirely on referrals. But here's the thing that really resonates. Justine's success didn't come from having some magical formula or avoiding all mistakes. She underestimated her first project, dealt with scope creep, and discovered she couldn't escape office politics, even as an independent consultant. What made the difference was her commitment to doing the right thing, even when it cost her in the short term. If you're struggling with fear about starting your own practice, remember Justine's question. What's the worst thing that could happen? Chances are, like her, you'll discover that the worst case scenario isn't actually that scary, and the potential upside is worth the risk. But if you're already independent and battling inconsistent income, take note of how Justine built her referral network. It started long before she needed it through genuine relationships and consistent value delivery. The consulting landscape is changing rapidly, as Justine's expansion into AI automation shows us. Those who adapt, build relationships, and stay curious about market needs will be the ones who thrive. Until next time, keep thriving through.